This week is Parshas Pinchas, and between the various different sugyas of this week's Parsha, we learn about Chalukas Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael was divided to the various Shvotim al pi Gorel. וידבר השם אל מוישה לאמור לאל את כל הקורץ בנחלו במספשמס לרב תר בנחלוסי ולמעט תמעיט נחלוסי יש לפי פקודו ייתן נחלוסי אך בגורל יכול הכסורס לשמויס מטויס אבויס מנחלו. And then the Pasuk once again stresses al pi הגורל תחולק נחלוסי בין רב למעט. Our topic this week is Gorel. I don't even know how you say Gorel in English, but everybody knows what a Gorel is. It's random, and that is the way Eretz Yisrael was divided amongst the different Shavotim. Gorel Urim V'Tumim V'Kalpi. Two baskets. In one basket, the names of the various different tribes, the Shvotim. At the other basket, various different areas, vicinities of Eretz Yisrael. And one ticket from basket number 1, another one basket number 2, and that Gorel determined which part of Eretz Yisrael will go to which Shevet. So first of all, I apologize. There's some building going on in this area, and I hope it isn't too much of an interference to listen to this year, but it's something which is beyond my control. So first of all, there's a machlokes and a shonim. To what extent did they use the Gorel in the days of Yoshua ben Nun, when they divided Eretz Yisrael to the various different Shavotim? Shitta Mekebetzes Bava Basa Kuf Yud Zayin Omud Beis quotes the Ravid. The Gorel was instrumental only in determining which part of the land goes to which Shevet. But within each Shevet, which family gets what? That was up to the Nasi of that Shevet, and that was not determined al pi Gorel. He just used his common sense and his sense of tzedek or mishpat, of justice, of righteousness, of integrity, and he divided up his part of the land to the various different families. Shit Mekabetzes Kuf Chof Aleph Amud Beis says that the Ravid retracted his opinion, and his Mishnah Achroina was even the Chaluke Pnimis, the internal distribution of land to the various different families belonging to the Shevet, was also al pi Gorel. And Toises, few different paces in Shas. Bava Kama Peches Amud Beis Kedushin Mem Beis Amud Aleph B'Choros Nun Beis Amud Beis. Toises says Gorel, and not only Gorel, Urim V'Tumim as well, to the last little details of Chalukas Eretz Yisrael. Was this a one-time psak, only Chalukas Eretz Yisrael? Once again, various different sources in Shas, primarily Bava Basa Kuva Amud Beis. Ha'achim shechalku. When children want to split up the inheritance of their father, they could once again use a Gorel. They don't need to make a Gorel. If they could just decide amongst themselves, mutual agreement, ma toiv. But if there is no mutual consent, then you use Gorel. And the Gemara says, Kechaluk ketchilos shel Eretz Yisrael. So we learn from Chalukas Nachla that the same applies generations to come. Achim shecholko kivin shezocha echod behem, then it is binding. And the first question I ask today, how do we relate to a Gorel? Is it only a practical methodology? When people can't agree who gets what, you use a Gorel. And the plus of the Gorel, the reason it is so appealing is because it's totally random. You're not dependent on the opinion of a person. You're not dependent on his judgment. Maybe he has some sinister interest. Maybe he has an agenda. It is totally random. but it's only a practical way of solving a problem without machlokes, without fighting? Or do we see the Gurel as divine judgment or divine inspiration? Is there Kedusha? A few weeks ago, the topic of our Shiur was Torah Lo B'Shamayim, and we discussed the Baskol and Nevuah and dreams. So, is the Gurel somewhat a Dvar Hashem? Do we say it is Min HaShomayim? Or is it just the most practical method of solving problems without machlokes? I think this is a huge machlokes in Achronim, which manifests itself in many different questions and many different areas. Piskei Tshuva Chosh Mishbet Kuf Ayin Gimel quotes the Shvus Yankev Chele Gimel Simen Kuf Samech Beis. Yes, there was an inheritance, and the children found difficulty in deciding who gets what, how to split up the father's Yerusha, and they decided to use a Goyel. But not the same system as it was used b'Chalukas Eretz Yisrael, but rather all the brothers pulled out a little note from a basket, and on that note it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 5 brothers or 5 siblings, and what they wanted to determine al pi Goyel is who gets first choice, who gets second choice. So, just as an example, I know when my parents passed away, my father passed away, and then later my mother passed away. As long as my mother was alive, nobody touched anything. But after my mother passed away a year and a half ago, we sat down around the table, and just the little things of the household, the silverware, sforim. My father had some precious for him, some Yudaika. So we went around the table, and when there were objects that more than one of the brothers wanted, though we did a Goyel. So these children decided that the Goyel will determine who has first pick, who has the second pick. And one of the brothers didn't like the outcome of the Goyel. He came out the last, and he said, no, I disagree. And the Shus Yankov says, this Goyel has no validity, because we learn from Chalukas Eretz Yisrael, and it must be exactly the same system as Chalukas Eretz Yisrael. The Goyel is only valid if the Goyel determines exactly who gets what. But if the Goyel comes to determine who gets the first pick and who comes after and who is second, who is third, who is fourth, who is fifth, that is invalid Goyel. And some Achronim say no. As long as you use a Goyel, you could choose whatever system you want. And I think the machlokes is exactly in the question I asked before. If the Goyel is just a reasonable method, and it probably is the most appealing method of solving an issue. So what is the difference what the Goyel determines? A Goyel is a Goyel, and if this system solves the problem, we should accept it. But if the Goyel is a spark of divinity, min hashamayim ein lanu elo ma shechidusha Torah chidushu ve'en lecho b'yelech kedushay, it must be the same system as we learn in Torah's Moshe. Similar discussion we find in Chosh Mishpat Kuf Nun Daled. The Gemara there, the Shulchan Aruch there, speaks about Cheskes Chalonos. It is Hilchos Shchenim. So if one neighbor opened the window, and when he opened his window in his wall, he broke a hole in the wall and opened the window, he wasn't causing any harm to his neighbors. There was nothing to see out of his window, no private domain. And then his next door neighbor in the next building wants to open a window, but that window will look into his bedroom, then he could object. So what would be the din? Both bought apartments in a new development, and both of them want to open a window. So there's no one that already opened the window, and both come to Beis Din and say, we both want to open windows, and we can't have these two windows one across the other, because we will both be deprived of our privacy. So Shulchan Aruch says, Yasu derech pshora, reach an agreement. Maybe the one that wants to open the window will be willing to compensate his neighbor, monetary compensation. I'll pay you, just let me open the window. And then the Sif Kot Nevav says, why don't we recommend a Goyel? And then the Siva says, because it is not similar to the Goyel of Chalukas Eretz Yisrael. And Goyel isn't valid unless it is exactly same system, same methodology as it was by Chalukas Eretz Yisrael. The Chazon Ish disagrees. Chazon Ish, Bava Basa Siman Yud Beis Ois Gimel, and the Chazon Ish says, Derech Pshora is a better solution than Goyel. Because after all, Goyel will leave one of them happy and one of them unhappy. And the one that is unhappy will accept his fate because he trusts the Goyel, This is luck and this is my bad luck. But if we could do Derech Pshora and have both of them be happy, one is going to get a window, one is going to get muddy, then it is a better suggestion. But if we're not successful in reaching a mutual consensual agreement, then we definitely would use the Goyel. And once again, I think this machloikes depends on two different approaches. What essentially is this Goyel? Fascinating tshuva in Chavis Shiur, Simen Samach Aleph, quoted Pischat Shiva Chushmishbet Simen Kuf Ayin Hey. So, once again, a person passed away, and we go back to DNA Chalukas Nachla, dividing an inheritance, and the father had one precious object. It was Yudaika, a sefer that was in the possession of one of the great Talmidei Abel Shem Tov, and each of the children, there were 12 children, and each of them wanted that special object. Then it made a Goyel. So they had 12 notes put into a basket, put into a hat. 11 were blank, and one of them was written Mazel Tov. And the one that gets that Mazel Tov, he is the one, Zachaloi, that gets that sefer. So Reuven picked a letter blank. Shimon picked blank. Levi picked blank. Then Yehuda picks, and he had some Mazel Tov. And okay, everybody says, that's it. Reuven took the sefer. And one of those that did not have their pick yet opened all the other notes. And he found there's another one that also has Mazel Tov written on it. And he says, this girl is invalid. Would we say the first one that was Zeicha and a note that Mazel Tov Zachaloi? Chavis Shiur says no. If there's any deficiency, any problem with the girdle, it is void, and you need to start again. So once again, 12 notes, same system, and each of them picked a note, and at the end of the day, there were only 11 notes in the basket. Each of them picked. One got a Mazel Tov. He's very happy. But the 12th one says, I didn't have a chance. There were only 11 setalach. So the psak would be, do it again. But the one that got the Mazel Tov reached an agreement with the one that didn't have a note. The one that was left outside the girdle. I'll give you 50%. I'll compensate you. And let's forego the need. The one that got the Mazel Tov note didn't want to lose his. So the only one that had the right to complain is the one that got nothing, because there was no note left for him. So he paid him off. Chavis Shiur says no. If there were only 11 notes, the girdle isn't just. And if it isn't just, then it's totally void. And I think the approach of the Chavis Shiur will also depend on the two different approaches. And the Chavis Shiur actually explains his opinion, and he says, we assume that a girdle manifests and expresses Min HaShamayim. It is like a baskol. It is like some level of Ruach HaKodesh. And therefore, if it's not right, then it's not just. It is totally void, invalid. And this agreement between Ploini and Almoini is meaningless. And they need to do Goyel number 3. So these are all different approaches in the validity and the meaning of a Goyel, and how do we relate to the Goyel. So all the examples I gave up to this very point, are dealing with monetary issues. What is the validity of a goyel when we're dealing with dina nefashos? So what comes to mind, I'm sure everybody listening to this year, is the story of Yoina Hanavi. So Yoina was running away from his duty, his mission imposed on him by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to go to Nineveh. And maybe at another opportunity we will discuss why was Yoina so afraid to go to Nineveh, and he tried to escape his mission and his destiny. But that is a separate discussion. And he gets on a boat going to nowhere, and suddenly there's a storm, and the boat is about to break down and disintegrate, and everybody will perish, and they're all davening. And Yoina says, I am the culprit, and I am endangering all of you. Throw me into the sea. And the sailors are reluctant to do so, and they do a girdle, and the girdle falls on Yoina, and they throw him into the sea. Was that a one-time event, or do we learn a halacha from the story of Yoina? Sefer Chasidim os Tofresh Ayin Tes. Sefer Chasidim is not exactly a halachic sefer, but Rabbi Yehuda Chassid was one of the Gedolim and one of the first Chasidei Ashkenaz going back 1,000 years. And in Sefer Chasidim Tofresh Ayin Tes he says this is a halacha l'doros. And if this ever happens again, you're out at the sea in the middle of the ocean and there's a storm, and we don't know what the story is, we make a girdle. And he says you need to do a 3-time girdle. Do it 3 times. And if all 3 times it falls on the same person, with tears, we're going to throw him into the sea. Why 3 times? An interesting Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer. Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, Perek Yud. He tells the story of Yoina beyond what we find in Kisvei HaKodesh and Sefer Yoina. The sailors did a girdle more than once. And they threw Yoina overboard, and in that moment the sea was calm and the danger was no longer. They threw him a rope and they hauled him in. They saved him, got him on the boat. That moment the storm was back again with a vengeance. They threw him into the sea, quiet. Brought him back to the boat, stormy. It is only after 3 times that they finally said goodbye and they threw him into the sea for good. So according to Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, they also 3 times. What is the significance of 3 times? Why isn't it enough once? I think this is also based on the fundamental approach of the Shiur. Goyal is not only a practical method of solving problems. We see the Goyal as an expression of Ritzayin Hashem, of divine intervention. How do we know that we are Ra'ui? If it happens 3 times, that is Cheskas Gimel Pa'amim. And this is a very fundamental sigi in Shas, starting in Yevomis of Samech Daled, Katlanis, Tinik Shemese Echov Machmas Mila. The very early source is Posik in the Torah Shor Muad. If a shor harms another animal once, Chotzi Nezek Shor Tam. Twice, Shor Tam, Chotzi Nezek. 3 times, Shor Muad, Nezek Sholim. What is the principle behind Cheskas Gimel Pa'amim? Many phenomena are coincidental. Something happened once, we say, happened, an accident, coincidence. If it happens 3 times, we are to look, what is the common reason? Why is this phenomena happening once, again and again? And we no longer are toila, we no longer say coincidence. And the same goes to a girdle. If we did a girdle 3 times, and all 3 times it fell on the same person, we no longer say it's random. It's unreasonable that it's random. 3 times, same person, it's like Shor Muad. Like Vestis and Hilchas Nida, Katlanis, Meise Echo Machmas Mila, all these sugyas are based on Cheskas Gimel Pa'amim. But Sefer Hasidim contradicts himself, because in Sif Tafshin Aleph he says exactly the opposite. And the Knesset Agdoyle 500 years ago, almost 500 years ago, already comments, realizes the stira in Sefer Hasidim. So the way I understand it, I don't think there's a stira. In the story of Yoina Novi, Rasha writes, why were they so terrified, and why did they think somebody needs to be thrown overboard? Because the sailors looked around at the sea, and the sea was quiet. There were other ships and boats on the right, on the left. Peace to them. And the storm was only surrounding their ship, their boat. The sea, as far as they could see, Mizrach Marav, Tzofan V'yam, it was quiet. Total serenity. So they understood something is wrong with our cargo, with the people in this boat. Tov Reish Ayin Tes, Sefer Hasidim, that is exactly the scenario he describes. If it's a calm sea, and it is only our boat that is breaking up, and it is only in the daladamas of our little boat that there's a storm and the sea is rocky, then there is Meshamayim. Something is wrong with one of the people in our boat. Tafshin Aleph, he speaks about a totally natural phenomenon. It's a stormy sea, as far as we can see, and that is the weather forecast. In that case, we do not rely on Goel. Goel is totally invalid when it comes to issues of life and death. We don't learn from Yoina. And this brings us to another halachic discussion, and that is in Trumis Perek Ches, Yerushalmi Trumis Mem Zayin. A group of Jews is in the desert or anywhere else on their way, and a bunch of cannibals attack them. And they say, give us one of you, we will kill him and devour him, and then we'll let all the others go. If you don't give us one, we'll kill all of you. And we don't give anyone. Mi yechya v'mi yamus is a decision only a Kodesh Baruch Hu could make. We don't have that authority. And therefore, we will all perish. But we don't have the right to say, you will die and we will live. And this halacha is brought in Yoredei Kuf Nun Zayin, and the Pischei Tshuva quotes, Teferes LeMoshe. But we could use a Geirel, and the Geirel should determine. Chazon Ish disagrees. Chazon Ish Yoredei Samechtet, Ot Aleph, and he says, we can learn nothing from Yoina. Yoina was a prophet. And when we learn Sefer Yoina, the decision was the decision of the sailors. It wasn't Yoina. Yoina just said, throw me into the sea. And they decided to do the Geirel. But the Chazon Ish says, even if we relate his Geirel to Yoina Hanovi, he was a prophet. So he had the authority. But it is not halacha ledoyos. However, the Chazon Ish says, if they decide by mutual consent to do a Geirel, and they all agree, then that would be valid. Because the Chazon Ish argues, a person has the right, even without a Geirel, to say, throw me into the sea to save all the others. Give me out to save all the others. And a person is entitled to forfeit his life to save the Rabbim, to save many others. Today is the outset of the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, one of the greatest Torah giants in hundreds of years. The Orach Chaim, even during his lifetime, was accepted by all the communities. He was Sephardi, admired and by all the Hasidim and the Litvish world. The Baal Shem Tov and the Grom, both were great admirers of the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. Needless to say, the Sephardi world today is your side. One of the magnificent form of the Orach Chaim is Rishon LeZion and Yoredeya. And there in Kuf Nun Zayin, he has a Gavaldig Chiddush, and he says, when Rebbe Kiva says, Chayecho kod malacher chavecho, that is a privilege, not an obligation. And each individual is entitled to give away his life to save another life. Chazon Ish says, Yochid v'rabim. Or Chaim is the only one that maintains, Chayecha kod malachai chavecho is a privilege. It is your right. It is not your obligation. And a Jew could give away his life to save another. Goyrel regarding mitzvahs. Is it valid or not? So we brought sources regarding monetary issues. We discussed two different questions regarding din and nefashos, issues of life and death. Mogen Avraham Kuf Lamed Beis Sif Kotten Beis says, if there's more than one chiyuv, but the minhag hamokum is that only one person says Kaddish, and there are various different minhagim. Hasidim usually have many people say Kaddish. In my shul, many chiyuvim, all of them say Kaddish. In Germany, Kielis Ashkenaz, only one person said Kaddish. If there are more than two chiyuvim, or more than one chiyuv, or three, or four, or five, as sometimes in big shuls, Mogen Avraham says, we do a goyrel. The source of goyrel alois regarding mitzvahs is the base of Mikdash, pious, miyiska, Tzumas Hadeshen, various other avodas in Mikdash. They use the goyrel. That would be the source of the Mogen Avraham. So the Mogen Avraham has a fascinating discussion. So there were a few chiyuvim, and they did a goyrel. And the system they used, they said, each and every one of you writes his name on a zetela, we put the names into a basket, we'll bring a young boy, a kid, take a name out, and he is the one that'll say the Kaddish. Pulls out a name, Yosef ben Shimon. But then two people out of the five say, that's my name. So which of the two? We need to do a new goyrel. Do we put all the five names into the new goyrel? Or maybe the three were eliminated by the goyrel. Yosef ben Shimon came out. Not Yankov, not Pinchas, not Klonimos, Kalman. But the Mogen Avraham says, if the goyrel was invalid, we do the entire goyrel again, and all five participate. I think this halacha once again is based on the assumption we mentioned before. Goyrel is Ruach HaKodesh. And if there's a problem in the goyrel, there's a void. There is no Ruach HaKodesh. There is no Siyata Dishmaya. And therefore the entire goyrel is invalid. If the goyrel would be just a practical tool, then we definitely would say the first three are, in any event, they're eliminated. Because the only name that came out was Yosef ben Shimon. Many Achronim disagree with the Mogen Avraham. Me'il Tzedakah Semen Yud, Shvus Yankov, Chelek Gimel Samachov Dalet, and this machlokes once again depends on the Chakira we spoke about before. Another question, the Mogen Avraham and other Achronim have a disagreement, and this is a fascinating one. Minhag HaMokum is only one person says Kaddish, and there are two chiyuvim. One of the two needs to leave town late at night or very early in the morning. So he tells his chaver, tomorrow by Shachris I won't be here. So you're going to say Shachris, you're going to daven for the Omer tomorrow morning, let me daven tonight. The other one says, no, I want to go. Maybe I'll be Zoycha tonight, and I'll have both days. I'll have a double. And you're not going to have anything. Mogen Avraham says, we use a goyrel. If the goyrel is just a practical tool to solve a dilemma, I think in our case we have no dilemma. Is there any more just and right way to deal with this? I'm not going to be here tomorrow morning. You daven tomorrow morning and I'll daven tonight. What's your problem? That's square and fair. But if we say a goyrel is min hashamayim, is like a bas kol min hashamayim, then he is right to say, I want a goyrel. Maybe it's min hashamayim that my father gets two kadeshim, and your father won't even have one. If that is what they want min hashamayim, let it be. So this psak also depends on the two different approaches, how we relate essentially to a goyel. Minchas Osha Moedim Chele Gimel have a fascinating discussion about Shnayim Mahalchem Bederach V'yesh B'neihem Kezayis Matzah. So everybody remembers the famous sugya in Bava Metzia, Shnayim Mahalchem Bederach V'yesh B'neihem Kiton Shel Mayim. What do we do with that Kiton Shel Mayim? Ben Petuna Rabbi Kiva says, Chayecha Koed Melchayecha Vecho. I once said with a touch of humor, Shnayim Mahalchem Bederach, and they only have one cigarette. What's the din? Give it to your friend, because Chayecha Koed Melchayecha Vecho. Let him have the cigarette. I think you should tear up that cigarette and throw it away, because in my opinion, you're not allowed to. I think it's an aveda to smoke. But that is for another opportunity. I said that many times, my humble opinion. So, Shnayim Mahalchem Bederach V'yesh B'neihem Kesayis Matzah. They got stuck somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and it's the first day Pesach. Two people have one Kesayis of Matzah. And I wrote at great length my opinion, Yesh Loila Odem Lios Toivayin Gam B'mitzvahs. And if you're sincere, it's you and your Rebbe, it's you and your father. Give it to your Rebbe, give it to your father. But once again, that is a huge discussion I don't want to get into today. But the Sha'at Shuvah, Orach Chaim, Tov Pei Bei says we should do a goyrel. So once again, this is the concept of a goyrel when we're not dealing with monetary issues, not issues passing judgment, life and death, but rather mitzvahs. And we see that goyrel is valid when we need to decide who gets to do the mitzvah and who not. In a way, this is a similar question to the story of the Kedeshim. Who gets to say Kaddish? So we briefly discussed some very interesting questions regarding the validity of Goyel, the essence of Goyel. Maybe at another opportunity we'll also relate to the mysterious and fascinating concept of Goyel Hagra. But that is for another opportunity. So this week is Parshas Pinchas. The story of Pinchas is told at the end of Parshas Balak. But the reward of Pinchas is in Parshas Pinchas. It's a vertel related to the Satmar Rebbe. Kvoid Kedushas, the Divrei Yoel, Zechat Tzaddik v'Kodesh Levrocha. And he said with a touch of humor, why is the story of Kinnis Pinchas and Balak and the reward, the Secharas and Pinchas? Because before you reward a kanoi, you need to really examine his motives. What brought him to be a kanoi? Was it L'Shem Shemayim? Does he have any personal agenda, personal negias? Is he an angry person or a person of compassion? So it needs to be checked and examined. We wait a week between the story and the reward. This is a vertel that was said by probably the greatest kanoi of our time. The Satmar Rebbe was a real kanoi. And the Satmar Rebbe was maybe one of the biggest balei chesed of our generation. I think he's a perfect example. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen heishev es chamusa miyal b'nei Yisrael bekanoi es kinosi b'soichem v'lo chilisi es b'nei Yisrael b'kinosi. This is a very lengthy description of Pinchas. I think the Pasuk wants to emphasize he wasn't angry. It wasn't out of vengeance. It was kulei l'shem shemayim. And before anything else, he was concerned about the consequences. The consequences and the price that Klal Yisrael might have to pay for this terrible Aveira and Chilul Hashem. And his prime concern was, Heishev es chamosi mi'al b'nei Yisrael, v'lo chulisi es b'nei Yisrael b'kinosi. So in Sanhedrin Pei Beis, we learn the lengthy sugi of Aboyel Aramis Kano and Poigem Boy, and that is halacha we learn from Pinchas. And the Gemara says that Pinchas came to Moshe Rabbeinu and he said, what should I do? Is this the right thing to do? And Moshe Rabbeinu says, Karyane digarte iuleheva parvanki, go ahead. If you ask the question, this is my answer. Halacha v'yein moirinken, it's not a chiyuv, but it's a schus. Chidush Haran, fascinating. Chidush Haran says, Pinchas came to ask Moshe, am I fitting to do this? Ha'im ra'ui ani lokach. And we learn from the Chidush Haran, not everybody has the right to be a kanoi. You have the right to do this only if you're really machaven l'shem shemayim. And Pinchas asks Moshe Rabbeinu for permission. Am I the right person to do this? And Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ein ish ra'ui mimcha. Yes, go ahead, because I know you, and you are machaven l'shem shemayim. Chofetz Chaim, a few places in a sefer, quotes the smak. Fascinating. Haroi defacha chavera lahorgo niten latzila benafshay. Haroi defacha nara marosa niten latzila benafshay. So a person wants to violate a Bas Yisrael and over an Issa Erva, niten latzila benafshay. We kill the perpetrator to save the victim. But the smak says, if a person killed roidef achanara hamarosa, he needs to live a very righteous life. Im yakoshal chaz v'sholem ba'oisei oven, yakoshal biyoda kilu shofar dam noki. If you're not going to be better than him, and you're going to be over anarayis, it is as if you spilled innocent blood, and you will be judged as a murderer. And this is a gavaldig yechidish, because we're not even dealing with Boil Alamis, which is Halacha Vein Moirinken. The din of Roidev is obligatory. It's mandatory. It's not voluntary. It is a chiyuv. Matzilen es anirdev benafshoy shel haroidev. Yes, it was your obligation, but now you have obligation number 2. And obligation number 2 is to be a tzaddik, to be better than him. You killed a person. And this act must be justified. And if you know better than him, then we can't justify what you did. You're mechuyev to do so. You didn't have the privilege to say no, just to pretend you don't see. No. It was your chiyuv, your obligation. But now, you must be a tzaddik. Otherwise, ki'ilu shofach dam. And many times I explained in this way the Gemara in Brachas Avchof. Rav Papa asks Abaye, Maisnu Rishonim deslachas lo nise v'anan. We don't have miracles. In the days of Rabbi Yehuda, when there was a famine in the land, he took off one shoe. He didn't even have time to take off a second shoe. And suddenly it was raining and pouring. And we daven and daven. Tzavchinan v'tzavchinan v'leis da'ashkech bar men shamayim. To no effect. And we're not zerich to rain. Abaye says, Rishonim de masra nafshe wa kedushas Hashem eslachas lo nisa. Previous generations had Mesiras Nefesh to be Mekadosh Shemayim, and that's why they were zerich to miracles. We lack that level of Mesiras Nefesh. And the Gemara brings an example. What is real Mesiras Nefesh? Avada Barahava walks on the street and he sees a woman that is immodestly dressed. He walks over and he tears to shreds her coat or her sweater, whatever she was wearing. And then people told him, this is not a Jewess. She's not a Jewish woman. She's a Gentile. She's not Mechuyev and Tznius. You have no right to hurt her. And he is taken aback, and he turns to that woman and he says, what is your name? And she says, Mosan. Mosan sounds like Mosayim, like 200. And he says, Mosan, Dalad Meyaziz Shavi, and he gives her $400. That's the end of the story. And I wonder, what do Chazal want us to learn from this story? An example of Mesiras Nefesh for Kedushas Hashem. What is the example? Rav Ada bar Ahava is a very respectable figure. He's one of the Gedolei Hador. He's a great teacher of Torah. This is very embarrassing in the street to walk over to a woman, to tear her beged, and she's probably going to call the police. You're going to be handcuffed. You're going to take to the police station. You know, this is a terrible embarrassment. You're going to be shamed, but he doesn't care. This is Mesiras Nefesh. So why do Chazal need to tell us the end of the story? She was Jewish, she was not Jewish. He asked her, what's your name? And he gave her $400. I think that's the punchline, and that is so important to understand the story, because we need to know, who was this Rav Ada bar Ahava? Was he an angry person or a forgiving person? If he's the angry type, so before going to shul in the morning, he had a fight with his wife because the coffee she made him wasn't exactly to his taste. And then he punched the gabbai in shul because he didn't give him shlishi. And now after davening, he walks down the street and he sees a woman that's dressed in a red dress and he tears her dress. If that would be the story, Rav Ada bar Ahava would not be considered a great person. That is not the kanoas to be admired. So we need to know, who was Rav Ada bar Ahava. When he was told that that woman wasn't Jewish, well, many people in our community would say, if she's not Jewish, then even better. No, she's a Gentile. But I hurt her without any justification. He asked her, what's your name? Chazal teaches, al tar b'sicho ima isho. Be'ishtoi omru kal v'choyme be'ishes acherim. And I Aaron, be'bas Yisrael omru kal v'choyme b'nochriyo. B'ishus hayochad omru kal v'choyme b'ishus harabi. So why doesn't he just run away? He asks her, what's your name? Because he hurt her. He wants to appease her. And she says, my name is Mosan. Mosan, Dalad Meyazuz Shavi gives her $400. He had the right to ask, where did you buy this dress? How long have you been wearing it? How much did you pay? So maybe we need an appraisal. How much is a used dress? This company, this material, how much is it worth? And I'll pay you as much as it's worth. No. He doesn't do that. He says, Musan. He gives her $400, probably far more than what the beged was worth. That's Rav Ada bar Ahava. So his kanoas was not out of anger and vengeance. It was L'Shem Shemayim. And that is why, yes, there was Zeichut to miracles. Kodesh Baruch Hu listened to their prayers. Yerushalmi at the end of Tanis, Sharut Rav Ada bar Ahava b'meherachtu yomim. Why you zeichit to old age? And he says, Meyoma lo yekpadati b'toich beisi. Do you know many people that could say, Meyoma lo yekpadati b'toich beisi? Never was I angry at home. Never did I lift my voice to my wife or my children. Meyoma lo yekpadati b'toich beisi. That's Rav Ada bar Ahava. Person of utmost compassion and caring and loving. He was the kanoi. That is why it is so admirable. That is why it's so great. So Rashi brings, why does the pasuk needs to say Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen? Lefi shoya shvutim avazan oisiv omrim ra'item ben puti zeh שפתאום אבי אמו יגורם לו ודזורה והורג נשיא שבט בישראל. לפיכך בעקוסה ויחס היה אחרי הארון. פנחס בן אלעזר בן אהרון הכהן. So let me share with you this feeling that I said many, many times, probably hundreds of times. Shvatim say, his grandfather was an Ovid of Israel. Why is that relevant? Why is that relevant? This comment is stupid, it's outrageous. The pasuk doesn't need to say Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen to teach us that this ridiculous comment is not acceptable. What does it have to do with his grandfather? And I say, those that made that comment had a point. And they said, Says the Gemara in Shabbos Kufhei, Meshaba Kelem B'chamosa Yeh Beinecho Koived Avodah Zorah. Kas has some connection to Avodah Zorah. When a person becomes angry, he loses control. You no longer control your emotions. You're losing control. You're becoming insane when you're mad. You no longer control what you're saying, what you're doing. You're impulsive, and in a way that is similar to Avodah Zarah. You're losing your mind, you're losing your judgment. That what happens to a person when he gets angry. In a way, it's insanity. You no longer could think straight. So the Shvatim said, Pinchas is an angry person. And no wonder, it's in his genes. His grandfather, Pitama Goram Avodah Zorah. And Kas and Avodah Zorah have some connection. That is what Chazal teach us. It's in his genes. That's what the Shvatim said. So don't think he's such a great tzaddik, Pinchas. He's an angry one. And the Pasuk says, you're right. It's all about genes. But you got the wrong Zayda. Pinchas doesn't resemble that one, Shepitam Avi Imoy Agoram Avodah Zorah. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. And who was Aaron HaKohen? Oyev Sholem, Roidev Sholem, Oyev Esabriyas HaMakayim and HaTorah. And those are Pinchas's genes. Pinchas, like Ravada Barahava, was a man of utmost mercy, Midas Toivus, Ahavas Abriyas, Anova, the most humble of people, the most compassionate of people. And he was the great Kanoi. Bedin hu sheyet al sacharoi. Hineni noisin lo yezabisi shalom. Yerotzen sheyech kenu amoim. We should be amongst those Talmidei Chachamim shemar b'shalom b'yolam, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us bris shalom. We should all be Zarcha B'Korah B'Yameinu. Rachmone Itkar Lan Kenausei de Pinchas Kanao Bedil V'Yavor. We should all be Zarcha de B'Seres Toives Santu Yeshua Selamim and be as Moshiach Tzedkenu B'Meheira V'Yameinu. Amen.